कह रहे जी कल आपने कल तो फिर बात हो रही आज की ओर अच्छा कल करना है यस
Okay. Am I audible to everyone out here?
मुश्किल है माइक्रोफोन ऑफ
So I formally welcome all ladies and gentlemen for sparing your valuable time and joining us on this beautiful morning in Islamabad. I hope this rain out there and make the things better for the weather also. As Anika has told you, Prime stands for public policy for promoting market economy in this country. And trade is very near to our heart because what we believe that trade basically contributes to a sustainable market economy. And this conference is held for that purpose. As Anika has mentioned that I've been writing about CPAC also because I have lived in China, and as far as the Chinese, you are aware of it, that it has become the largest trading nation in the world. And one of the major contribution to that trading nation is the devolved commerce structure in that country. In China, you have Ministry of Commerce at the central level. Then you have Commerce Commission at the provincial level. And then you have Commerce Bureau at the municipality level. It is not done in a very centralized manner. It is done in a very devolved manner. That's why China has reached that position. In Pakistan, as what we are promoting here, and we have got a very august panel of speakers out here who will be introduced in due course of time by Anika to all of you. And I believe that this will be a very good session for every one of us to learn. And obviously,
government is to look at those issues which were not previously tackled in the 15th century. So one of the things they thought is that our customs tariff, which has become the main trade policy instrument of the government, but it was always ignored. And there was so much anti-export bias that we reformed this. So the Ministry of Commerce has taken the lead. They have got the Prime Minister's approval to put in place an overall tariff reform, what they call it, there's some name, Tariff Rationalization Committee or something, with the Commerce Minister and Finance Minister, and that's the overall structure. Then underneath is a tariff reform policy center, tariff policy center at the National Tariff Commission. And so there's a structure now, and on top of it, not on top of it, but parallel to this, they thought that we need to rush because these cells and centers would take their time in long term. But what do we do start immediately? So they set up a tariff reform committee. I was asked to head that committee, and we have about 12 people representing all the stakeholders, whether it's commerce or whether it's Ministry of Industries, it's FBR, and then we have private sector. We have a representative from Chambers of Commerce who is coordinating all 56 chambers or 54 chambers, whatever the number in the country. Lahore Chamber President, he's a member of that. And then we have the key associations. We have the president of the Pakistan Chemical Manufacturers Association and the Steel Manufacturers Association and Textile Manufacturers Association. So we have these private sector people and we have these government sector people, and we are meeting regularly. We're taking stock of the progress that we are making, and hopefully soon we would have prepared a revised tariff. Okay, this is about tariff. The second big thing the government is doing its reforms is on ease of doing business. They've been talking about it for a long time, but for the first time, they're actively pursuing. They're looking at each indicator. Why is Pakistan gone down so much? What can we do? And they've already done something. A few things have already been, for example, integration of this SCCP with business registration portals. Electricity connection process has been automated. Federal and provincial taxes can now be paid online. You don't really have to queue up or anything. So there are many, property registration has been automated. So there are many those factors which bring us down whenever there's a ranking. So they are trying to improve those, and hopefully, it will already, I think this year, Pakistan went up 11 points. This is after a long time, because from, if you look at 10 years ago, 15 years ago, our ranking was, at least, we're not doing that well, but at least we were always in the top 100. Now we have been in the bottom somewhere, 30, 40, somewhere at the bottom. So at least we are.
Thank you.
Yeah, just because you've given his local background, and many people have seen him on television every night defending one ministry or another. So I'm not going to go into that, but maybe they didn't know too much about how extraordinary player he was at Geneva. Although I had left Geneva, but still had my friends, still now and then I talk to them, other ambassadors, etc. And one day one of the things that are needed, he's got all those coordinates. So he left a very good name, for Pakistan in Geneva circles, and I thought I'll apprise you of that. So when he was the Commerce Minister, I used to go and see him, and sometimes he would not be too happy with my articles. He says, "Dr. Saab, aapne phir meri laundry kar di hai." But he would tell me.
I'll tell you why.
And he would tell me, again he would say, "Aapne kiya hai, lekin karte rahe, khoob kare, ye mujhe bhi acha lagta hai, continue this." So he didn't take anything personally. He said, continue, whatever you feel, go ahead, public debate. So, Mr. Dastgir, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think I'll use the lectern if.
Yes, sir.
If that is. वैसे तो यहाँ भी बैठ के भी हो सकता है, because for once I don't have prepared remarks. I just have observations from the trenches where I served as Commerce Minister. I had this great blessing of Allah Almighty. Ladies and gentlemen, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, thank you very much to Dr. Manzoor and Mr. Pandey for inviting me here this morning. The reason I used to say to Dr. Saab to keep writing was that there is no constituency for free trade in this country. हमारे मुल्क में कोई आज़ादाना तजारत नहीं चाहता और that's why the people like Dr. Manzoor who continue advocating policy changes which would encourage free trade, very basic issues like reducing import tariffs on many materials that we import, because they have, as he said so correctly, from my city of Gujranwala, that the steel they are importing, it has duties, now has regulatory duty, because essentially what FBR does is if it sees import of any raw material rising, it sort of swoops down and puts an RD on it. That's the general rule that we have seen. So that's why I was very pleasantly surprised to be invited here, because we don't see much argument for free trade in this country. All I heard during my tenure was this cries for more protection. I heard cries for more subsidies. And yes, they have a place in the overall trade scenario, but whatever support government is going to provide, to my mind, it comes from a single principle. It's not really an established theoretical principle, but a rule of thumb that a country should not export its local taxes on the product it is exporting. तो जो भी आपने ड्यूटियां लगाई हुई हैं, टैक्स लगाए हुए हैं, जो भी आपका सामान यहाँ से बाहर जाना है, it should be free of those taxes. It becomes competitive. Local taxes हैं, levies हैं, मुख्तलिफ किस्म की, उससे आपने आज़ाद करके अपनी प्रोडक्ट बाहर भेजनी तो competitive होगी, वरना तो कभी नहीं होगी. So yes, there was a space there, and one of the long arguments I had with the former finance minister, Mr. Razak Dawood, was because exporters demanded correctly that they were being unfairly penalized in electricity charges when they were being treated the same, in which losses in other sectors and certain regions of the country were piled upon industries of Islamabad and Gujranwala and Lahore and Multan, and so people were upset. And they had an argument that why should they pay extra for electricity when they are very good users and payers of bills on time. But mostly, as I said, the argument for free trade is rare in this country. And that's why free trade agreements, which is the ostensible topic I've been given, on which I will not be speaking very much. I'm warning you in advance. Free trade agreements actually evince hostility. कि जी आप तो बेड़ा गर्क करने जा रहे हैं तो ये बेड़ा गर्क हो जाएगा, अगर आपने उससे FTA किया तो ये बेड़ा गर्क हो जाएगा. The thing is that free trade agreements essentially and free trade in general opens a space for new possibilities which we have not yet seen. And so since it's unknown, it sort of causes this, people who are benefiting from the current regimes, they get upset. So this free trade argument is very, very valuable and must be made, and I want to congratulate Prime Institute for making this argument today in different forms. But what I learned, I'll just share with you that the first year of our government was, in terms of our exports, a good year. Very few people now recognize or even acknowledge that the first year of PMLN government, 2013-14, is, as of today, the year of the highest exports Pakistan has ever made, $25.1 billion. We crossed 25 billion for the first time. That's why I have a single slide, which is from the State Bank of Pakistan's annual report last year, which gives out what were the exports of Pakistan in the 5 years of PMLN government. And 25 billion has been crossed only once in Pakistan's history, which was 2013-14. And then exports fell. Why? Policy hadn't changed dramatically. So I urge you to consider the fact that the second half of 2014 was the time of the dharna. Fear of political instability causes fear of economic policy instability, and it creates uncertainty. And so we saw that exports fell by $1 billion the next year. We had $24 billion. Then we were not very fortunate in our timing of our government, because 2015 and 16 were years of a unprecedented global slowdown in trade. These 2015 and 16, if you will go to the statistics, were the first 2 years after World War II when growth in world trade was less than growth in global GDP. In fact, the growth in trade has been outpacing GDP growth by decades. But it happened. It is also relevant to us because in 2015 there were devaluations. One of our favorite bugbears. Turkey devalued, China devalued, India devalued. Major exporters were all suffering. They all, not very much, 10%, 15% maximum, they devalued. China was forced to devalue for the first time in decades. So we caught a bad cycle, and that's why you see that the 2015-16 numbers and 16-17 numbers are not very good. But at the same time, the structural problems that were being discussed, I think these are just, something that, I blame these issues for making my hair go white. Words like, value addition, Dr. Saab, we've heard them so many times. Small and medium enterprises, and many other cliches, and are now cliches, why in trade argument, why it doesn't happen. In our case, the reason we were not able to bring out something which would support exports, as we were told, it was the IMF program. We were in the IMF program until September 16, and therefore the 180 billion rupees that Commerce Ministry was demanding as a program to give drawback of local taxes and levies, which is called DLTL, to exporters could not be instituted. Lo and behold, in September 16, IMF program ended. In January 17, we were finally able to announce a program. And that is why, interestingly, beginning with the fiscal years 2017-18, exports began to rise again. As you can see, the very final number on that slide is 24.772 billion. In the final year of PMLN government, exports rose by 12.6% in dollar terms, without massive devaluation. What was going on? Again, it's a question of what was going on. And so interestingly, devaluation is not the only policy, and I think by far it's never the only policy with which to raise export. There are many other factors so the idea is, ladies and gentlemen, in my view, if we are talking about increasing Pakistan's exports, is we have to keep our exports competitive, and devaluation is one of the tools that we have to use, but it's not the only tool. And before the thought goes away, I think Dr. Manzoor, with much stronger academic background than I have, these two topics are subtly different. Increasing Pakistan's exports and free trade. They do come together in many places, but they don't come together in the reason I say this is because of my own personal experience, is that I personally was less than enthusiastic about, going into the FTA mode with many countries. We had an interesting but less than positive experience with China, in which we had an FTA with them, and the FTA 2 negotiations stalled for years. We were demanding in the end, which probably this government is also demanding, that China treat us at par with ASEAN, with which they have a very extensive and deep FTA. The Chinese were less than forthcoming. So another of the lessons for this very distinguished audience is that Commerce and Ministry of Foreign Affairs have different maps of the world. Our friends may not be our most amenable trading partners, and our most amenable trading partners may not be our best friends. So there is this tension, a dialectic, a trade dialectic, in which, Turkey, with which we have excellent relations across the board, when it came to an FTA, first we sort of banged our heads against the wall for a PTA, and then that didn't happen, so I upped the game and went straight. I said, we should have an FTA if you're not willing to do a PTA with us. But as of today, it is still stalled because they are trying to protect their domestic textile manufacturers, which they feel that Pakistan's textile exports to Turkey will hurt their domestic textile manufacturers. So it's an issue. It's also an issue of we, as our business community, let's just say, and our exporters, have also neglected some of our best friends like Saudi Arabia, in which the complaint of the Saudi business community is that Pakistani businessmen only come for Umrah. They don't really see us as a market that needs to be exploited. So I am full of these stories and issues that exist. But as I said, first thing, how to increase Pakistan's exports is a subject on which we just have to admit that we are, as a general rule, an economy stuck in the 80s. We are, as Dr. Saab was just saying, the same old patterns are there in textile exports, in rice exports, the same old bugbears of sports equipment, surgical equipment, and it's hard to see any real innovation coming in. But then the lesson of commerce, and which I will illustrate in a few minutes, is that it's an ministry that is probably one of the most intensely monitored ministry in terms of statistics, because every month, right at the end of second week, the exports and import numbers will come out. So it's right there, it's for everyone to see. But at the same time, these numbers are hiding efficiencies and inefficiencies that have nothing to do with commerce. Commerce used to have control over tariffs, but many years ago, under another IMF program, long ago, that control shifted to Ministry of Finance. So Commerce is a ministry that doesn't control tariffs. It's a ministry that doesn't control the ports. It's a ministry that doesn't control utility companies. These are issues that everyone, brought to my table. The Commerce Ministry doesn't control anti-narcotics force. Why? It's an issue. It's an issue because the exporters were complaining that ANF at the two Karachi ports was opening their containers and damaging their packing. And I had to personally go to Port Qasim to witness this and to sort of have, exporters and ANF sit on one table and say, find a way to, so that the exporters don't suffer. So things like this on many areas in which we are entirely dependent upon the kindness of other ministries and other departments that I actually made out a list of things that commerce doesn't have control over. We don't have control over tariffs, we don't have control over customs, not over the ports, we don't have control over exporters' refunds, we don't have control over industrial policy, we don't have control over agricultural standards and seeds, we don't have control over scientific standards, we don't have control over the energy companies and energy pricing. So these are all these issues that in different forms kept coming on my table. People would complain about the differential in gas prices between Sindh and Punjab and how that was hurting exports. People would bring about the issue of, because again in 2014 we had a record cotton crop of 14.1 million bales, and then in 15 it just crashed down to 9 point something million bales. And the whole issue was that, the seeds, the cotton seeds that we are using have degenerated, as in the right word says. So many issues that for a commerce minister trying to increase Pakistan's exports has to coordinate intensively with other ministries and requires a almost daily, if not weekly, attention of the Prime Minister to coordinate everything. Otherwise, things will not really happen of how things are going. So the reason I say that, they've hardly seen any innovation in our exports is that we always love to talk about our ICT sector and how well it is doing. Well, we had sort of a clash with the IT people because their exports were showing up in our numbers at around $500 million, and actually they were claiming in excess of $2 billion. So I said, what's going on? Where is the $1.5 billion that you're earning? Naturally, it was lying abroad. So they were, they were only repatriating enough money to pay for electricity and their people, and that's it. So they were just doing this, massive business that was not showing up. Similarly, I had a running argument with our defense export organization. I said, where are your numbers? Why aren't they reflected in our exports? Nothing was coming. So things like this. As I said, I'm here to learn also from all of you about how to move beyond these cliche issues of value addition. Because apparently it seems to me, and it was clear to me in my last year before I went through defense in the summer of 2017, is some kind of, Dr. Saab, a hand-holding institution which could actually go into new sectors and begin to teach them. Because another aspect of it was that Export Development Fund, which was, that's another, a wound on my psyche, is because we were collecting in excess of 5 billion rupees, getting less than $1 billion from finance each year. But even where we were spending it, it was clear to me that it wasn't very efficient use of those funds. We were trying to spend money on institutes, again, to address a complaint by exporters that didn't have enough trained workforce. But every institute which we funded, we built, we brought in machinery, and then gave to the industrial sector to which it was targeted. With probably one exception, all of those institutes were entirely dependent upon government. So the industrial sectors were not willing to cough up their own money to train people, and they thought this would come some sort of a manna from heaven from EDF, which would continue to come. And I kept saying to them, again, argument, I said, I can make buildings for you, I can give machinery for you, I can give you funds for 1 or 2 years, but ultimately you have to run them. EDF is not there to provide running expenditure to pay for electricity, but apparently that's the expectation. So we have to find, as I said, going forward, number one, to address the software people and ICT exports, there has to be changes in our tax laws, of how we deal with these exports, which are non-corporeal, and they fly over the fiber optic cables, all these services, how to bring them into the net, how to encourage them to come into the net. That's one challenge. The next challenge is, of course, not just by an export point of view, but how to support our SMEs, and there the challenge is very clear, is that our SMEs, and again, thank you, Dr. Saab, for mentioning Gujranwala, which is my hometown, is a classic case in which it is filled, the city is brimming with very small enterprises, family owned, for generations, but they don't want to go to the bank. They will never seek credit because, first of all, they are afraid of all these educated people who will ask them to fill forms. They will have to go into the tax net also. So they are happy to remain small, and whatever skills they have gained are only transferred in a very imperfect way to the next generation, who might or might not want to do that business. When in fact some of them, as I've seen them, have this tremendous potential. They are doing really refined work, but they never corporatize. It never expands. It never achieves the economies of scale that are needed, not only for domestic manufacture, but export also. So how do we fund our SMEs? How do we provide credit to industries is a massive issue. And of course, when countries are in IMF programs, they have this big issue of maintaining fiscal discipline. And so this whole question, which I want to leave this audience with, to which I never was able to discover a good answer despite making an effort, but not succeeding, is how, where and why the government of Pakistan, through Ministry of Commerce and other ministries, should be intervening. That design is, to me, a big challenge. Because otherwise we will do things like, and I ended up doing, is breaking ground for an expo center in Peshawar. Hopefully it will be built sometime later next year. We should be finished. So we build expo centers, we fund institutes, but how and why to intervene, and how to ensure that new entrants into the export field come in, because it is an issue. When you look at statistics, every year you see this very large number of one-time exporters which never export again. So that persistence How to ensure that that exporter that has made the effort is able to export again on a sustainable basis. So this question of designing the government's intervention, which of course, since it's Commerce Ministry, has to come on so many different levels. It has to come on the level of having a better cotton seed, having a better rice seed, because these are major exports. And I think one of our major issues of competitiveness is having a good local cotton crop, which is extremely important. And then, of course, we have to look at what our competitors are doing, what our regional competitors are doing. Another thing which I felt had gone totally unnoticed, that 10 years ago, India was not a competitor in textiles. Today, it is a massive competitor. Just towels alone, the economies of scale that they have achieved is causing us problems. And then, of course, is this issue of the outside world and how we deal with it. We were able, by Allah Almighty's blessings and our efforts, Commerce Ministry and Ministry of Foreign Affairs coordinated very well to achieve GSP Plus in the beginning of 2014. It was approved end 2013. It persists to this day. Hopefully, it will make its full run until 31st December 2023. It is the widest and longest trade concession we have had. It's a big debate about how well we have benefited from it. What numbers tell us is that at least the increase in our exports to Europe has been right on par of expectations. In the first 3 years, we were able to gain nearly 36–37%. It was very widely distributed in Europe. Our exports to many different European countries increased. Their exports to Pakistan increased, so they are happier. But of course, how to make use of it, because GSP Plus is not just textiles. It is so many other sectors that are open. Quota-free access, duty-free access. 5 years will, I think, just concluded in December. So another 5 years are left. The challenge is, how do we do that? Although we worked very hard in creating reports and trying to encourage our fruit and dairy sectors to come up. But fruit is another massive story, which sort of goes up and down. Our quinoa exports, again, this whole lack of a organized infrastructure which we could provide to our farmers and cultivators to allow them to exports. There is, I felt, because probably of the insular nature of the Pakistan's economy, a resistance in our industrialists and our agriculturalists in practically any sector. There is a resistance to comply with international standards. And they always would come to me as Commerce Minister, say, हमें 2 साल और ले दें, हमारे लिए मुश्किल है. When somewhere they were asking some very basic things, but they do inspect how you are storing, in textile units, how you're storing your harmful chemicals. They come and look at it. How you're treating your workers. They come and look at it. So again, it's this sense of Pakistan really has not connected. Well, fully is an exaggeration, even a quarter with the rest of the world. The rest of the world is complying with international standards, and it's an issue. Finally, how the FTAs have done. The China FTA is a big example, is that China from a bigger base was able to raise its exports to Pakistan nearly 400%. We were able to raise our exports from a much smaller base, about the same. So you can't say it's a disaster. It has helped Pakistan. For a while, it really helped our low cost and low value added exports. But trade is a ever evolving, ever changing scenario. What was a good FTA with China in 2006 has been eroded by China's subsequent FTAs with ASEAN, in which it's practically 0% across the board, with very few exceptions. So what we call preference erosion regarding China is something that we need to deal with daily. Apparently, the Commerce Ministry these days is doing it. So, as I said, great resistance to FTAs with Turkey and Thailand, the only two ones that we were negotiating. Again, Turkey being a gateway to Europe, and Thailand, in our estimation, was a gateway to ASEAN and to East Asia, something that we have not been able to conclude. The resistance from practically every sector that is involved in it, that don't do an FTA, it will hurt us, we are unable to compete. This is a word, Dr. Saab, that, and of course the distinguished audience can tell us, what does it mean not being able to compete? Something for us to think about, because the world is galloping forward. And we keep saying, oh, no, we need to keep these high tariff barriers to protect us because we are unable to compete. And it's, for me, I want to give an example of Thailand. For me, it is a question of really humility to see a country like Thailand, which has a completely different impression in a normal Pakistani mind, is one of the export powerhouses of the world. $250 billion in exports each year. So what happened? And this question of, I think it's very clear that yes, you can have a little temporary safety by keeping barriers high. If you really want to grow, you have to take a risk. So one of my, for another, whenever we have an opportunity, a very interesting tale of my tenure was trying to normalize trade relations with India. And during that dialogue, I used to quote David Lloyd George, one of the prime ministers of Great Britain in First World War. He said, you cannot cross a chasm in two small jumps. So when you have to act boldly, you have to just take the leap. Because the chasm is there, because there are people are, will resist, but you have to jump across. So free trade is a chasm that we cannot cross with small jumps. It has to be jumped across. There are so many other things. One of the things, again, the role of FBR in export promotion and export reduction is a subject in of itself that we dealt with. Their resistance, one of the things that we were doing in commerce while I was there was to write this series of laws on e-commerce legislation, massive 4 pieces of legislation on e-commerce, and it couldn't happen because FBR resisted, that somehow people will import so much stuff if you do it duty-free or buy their credit cards online, that they won't get duties. And one of the things that despite knowing a very strong economic case for lower import tariffs, doesn't happen is the FBR's addiction to customs and import tariff duties. They are getting anywhere each year, maybe Dr. Saab will have better figure, at least 30% of our revenue, 47% this year. So the less the economy grows, the dependence upon import tariffs is even more. So it becomes a chicken and egg problem of how do you deal with it. If you reduce that, so every time we had this running argument each year at budget time with FBR, we would go and say, reduce this tariff, this tariff, this tariff, and they wouldn't argue on the principle. They would say, if you reduce this tariff, we get 2.8 billion less. If you reduce this tariff, we get 7.8 billion less. So how do you counter that? Because essentially the benefit is in the future and the loss is immediate. It's like dieting. So and that's why FBR has been unable to diet, like me. So it's things like this. So in my view, I've always felt that this commerce was a particularly difficult challenge because it required, when we started doing our GSP plus monitoring, we had to call in all these ministries of railway, ports and shipping, energy, we had to call in FBR, we had to call in all provinces. So it was this endless coordination task that Commerce Ministry has to perform. One of the big issues which no one really thinks and talks about are scientific standards, quality standards, because they are housed in Ministry of Science and Technology, and these standards are a big issue in trade negotiation. So how do you deal with that? So it was I think it requires a strong constitution to be a commerce minister and to be able to deal with constantly with all these ministries, all the while facing the monthly firing line of statistics that comes out each year. It's also an issue of the current capacity of the Pakistani state to implement policies, which is grossly, in my view, degraded in recent years. Something, again, we don't think about, but something to really for this distinguished audience. Finally, it's very clear to me that much of our economic conundrums and trade conundrums end up being at one place, is to have enough political stability so we can have some economic stability. Pakistan needs a decade of 7% plus GDP growth. It is as much an economic issue, as much an employment issue, and as much a defense issue, since I've dealt with that also. So how do we achieve that? Because we are in constant political turmoil, and that is not good for the economy, as we have seen. So I actually came this morning with the hope that the current Commerce Minister and my successor will explain to us why exports declined 11% year on year in March, despite a 30% devaluation. What is going on? Because, if you look at the July to March numbers, they are practically in a dead heat with the previous fiscal year. So July to March numbers are showing, if you go to the PBS website, an increase of 0.2%. The 9-month export numbers are showing an increase of 0.2% in exports against a 30% devaluation. So again, it is clear that devaluation is not the only factor. Some other factors are at play, again, because this government's inexplicable policy of raising interest rates to 10.75%. I don't know why they did it, but they've done it. So we need to know why this is happening, that devaluation has not brought about what we thought or expected, a quantum leap in our exports rise. But ultimately, the lesson is that ours is essentially an antiquated 80s, late 70s economy. We have to find new industries and new sectors from which to bring in the growth that we need. And for that, as I said, the greatest intellectual lack that I felt in my years at Commerce was that at the moment the government really doesn't know how to help and facilitate the exporter. We know how to give duty drawbacks, yes. We know how to give refunds, but how to encourage new sectors, new people to step into that field of exports is a medium to long-term challenge because, of course, these numbers will keep repeating and come every month. They will come up and down. But the largest challenge is that we have to find new sectors. And one thing that I felt, maybe it is a limited point of view because I was at Commerce for some years, is that unless export promotion and growth is the principal aim of economic policy, we will not achieve it. Essentially, all other sectors and all other sectors of policy have to be geared towards that export promotion, as we have seen in Bangladesh and in some measure in Vietnam. Is that everything, tax policy, tariff policy, customs, how things are done at ports, preference on utility and energy, it's all geared towards promoting and facilitating exports. Here our aims are very different, and some aims are political challenges because some of the exporters come to me, and this is my final point, the kind of conundrums that commerce ministers have to face. Each year, government of Pakistan, probably correctly and with some justification, raises the minimum wage. But the exporters come to us and say, what are you doing? We are becoming uncompetitive. That Bangladesh is giving $67, you are forcing us to pay $109. So we have become uncompetitive. But the truth is that, and this is the positive note on which I want to end. In 2013, when this PMLN government took office, the country was practically drowning in terrorism and load shedding. So the fact that we were able to overcome these two challenges, which to my mind were the principal constraints on our economic growth, should give us confidence that yes, large-scale issues can be resolved if there is enough will and a sensible government at the helm. So just the fact that we no longer have an energy crisis and that we no longer have a terrorism crisis should give us hope that we can still resolve our largest collective challenges and move forward into the future. Thank you very much for patient listening. As I said, I didn't have a written speech. I just have some wounds to show you during my time at Commerce. Thank you very much. Pakistan, Paindabad.
Thank you, Mr. Dastgir, for providing us with valuable insights to